NCTV45, The Train, anytime on your time. The Cedars is a great restaurant with outstanding Mediterranean food. The Cedars takeout menu is second to none, featuring pizza, stromboli, hoagies, their famous lamb on the rod, and so much more. So when you're hungry and you want that Newcastle taste, make it Cedars. Now with 2 locations in Newcastle, 827 Addis Street on the east side and 1101 Highland Avenue. Call Cedars East 724-658-9260 or Cedars North 724-652-7657.
The Beanery Depot and Deli. Coffee, made-to-order subs, snacks, and more. Meatball sandwiches, fresh and hot. Pepperoni rolls, fish sandwiches, chicken, milkshakes. The Beanery Deli. When you're hungry for something special, and it won't cost you a lot of beans.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to NCT45, the Cedars Sports Corner, brought to you by the 360 Sports Network and the Fantasy Football Toolkit. I'm James Dodson. On assignment tonight, Greg Bashir unable to make it with us, and Alex DeLaverson has the day off. So it's just the Value Man tonight, bringing you all of your fantasy football updates and news and everything you need to make Week 2 better than Week 1. And hopefully your Week 1 was just fine for you. We're going to talk a little bit some waiver wire picks in the upcoming segments. We're going to talk about a cool game we like called Winning with the Wire, which we'll get to again in our second segment. But what we want to first do is look back on Week 1, and again, what a crazy Week 1 it was. Lots of surprises, lots of goods, lots of bads, and just overall getting a bit of a feel of what is to be expected in the NFL this year. A couple big surprises. How about there's only 2 running backs that had over 100 yards, and one of them isn't even a starter, and he's the oldest running back in the league. Yes, D'Angelo Williams, 133 some odd rushing yards, a bunch of receiving yards, a couple of touchdowns. He was your leading fantasy point getter for running backs this week. Not bad for 33 years old. Lamar Miller, the only other running back in the entire NFL to rush for over 100 yards. A couple running backs were over or close to breaking the century mark in the receiving ground area. Mainly, it was Spencer Ware in Kansas City. Again, a backup who is going to be a force to be reckoned with in Kansas City. He had over 100 yards in the air. So let's start with that. The question of what can we expect once Jamal Charles comes back in Kansas City. Is there going to be a 2-headed monster there? What can we expect with Le'Veon Bell coming back after suspension in a couple of weeks? Is he going to be in a bit of a timeshare maybe with D'Angelo Williams? We'll start with that one because I think that's a complete no-no. The thing is, though, obviously, when has Le'Veon Bell ever played a full season in the NFL? He's very injury-prone, so it's very likely that D'Angelo will find himself starting games late in the season yet again because you have to almost expect the injury for Le'Veon. On the other end, because of the injury-proneness and the fact that it seems Charles can't stay healthy for more than 1 week at a time, that's where I do think you might see a bit more of a timeshare because Spencer Ware has been playing great, and I think the biggest thing, we mentioned the 100 yards receiving, he had 5 career receiving yards before the Week 1 game. So keep an eye on that and see what happens. As of now, Jamal Charles still listed as questionable, so we'll keep an eye on that for sure. Some of the other big booms, how about Danny Woodhead, another pass-catching running back? He had 89 yards on the ground, which was impressive on 16 carries, 5 catches for 31 yards and a score there. So very impressive work, and he actually has more touches and more snaps than the starter, Melvin Gordon. The only one who's fantasy relevant really for long-term is Danny Woodhead. I know Melvin Gordon had a couple touchdowns. That's a blessing. He went with only a couple touchdowns all of last season, one of the longest scoring droughts ever. So keep your eye on Danny Woodhead. Hopefully you've drafted him. He's available in leagues. He's one of our guys to definitely pick up if he is still available. How about this? Mohamed Sanu, available in over 50% of leagues. He had the 8th best score for wide receivers. 16 fantasy points in week 1. Also got to keep an eye on him, though. He played throughout the entire game, but was noticed limping in the locker room after the game. So keep your eye on that throughout the week. He did practice on Wednesday, so that's at least a good sign there. Also wanted to mention, how about the best tight end in the league in terms of fantasy production? I guarantee you did not have him on your team, and you certainly didn't have him in your roster. That's because only 0.2% of all fantasy leagues out there even had them on his roster, and that's Jack Doyle, the number 2 tight end in Indianapolis. He only had 3 catches, but 2 of them went for touchdowns, and that ended up being more than good enough. Of course, Dwayne Allen had a pretty solid game as well, 5 or 6 catches and a touchdown, about 45 yards. Can't argue that. If you're getting double-digit production from your tight ends, especially if you don't have one of the mainstays, the Gronkowskis, the Jordan Reeds or Greg Olsons, that's when you know that you are putting up solid points. So that's good things to go for. One last boom. How about the entire New Orleans Saint offense against what's supposed to be a good defense in the Oakland Raiders? Drew Brees had over 30 points. Both wide receivers, Cooks and Snead, had big games. I personally had Willie Snead on my bench, and that's something that we're going to talk about later. Maybe some trade bait opportunities with some of these wideouts. Cooks had 27 fantasy points in standard leagues. A 98-yard touchdown catch certainly will help you with that. Now, off to the bus in our Boomer Bust segment is looking first at another one of those Saints. How about Coby Fleener? What a disappointing first game for him. Thought maybe he would take the old Jimmy Graham role, but then again, he didn't exactly produce when he was a tight end playing with Andrew Luck, either at Stanford or in Indianapolis. So maybe not as shocking as we should have thought it was, but at the same time, only 1 catch for 6 yards. Hopefully he bounces back, but if this trend continues for a second week, it's going to be sayonara real quick for Coby Fleener. One of the biggest busts, again, Keenan Allen, obviously, with the non-contact injury. He's done for the year. We'll look at some potential players for you to pick up in our next segment. He still had a decent game, and that's what stinks, is that his game was very solid, looking good, until it came time to, for him to have left the field. Adrian Peterson, 19 rushes. That's great. Only 3 fantasy points. Not so great there. So AP also getting up there in age. Maybe it's just a bad week. I think it's just a bad week. I think that number will definitely turn around. I also think it will turn around for Todd Gurley, who cost many teams a fantasy win in week 1 because of his 4 fantasy point performance on Monday night. That entire Rams team just looked dreadful against the 49ers of all teams. Here's the big one I want to touch on, though. Devonta Freeman. He had 15 touches, only 4 fantasy points. And it was a dead even timeshare. And this is what I told you guys about. I was worried that Tevin Coleman was going to eat into his carries, and it was almost a dead 50-50 split. I'm almost willing to stay away completely from that backfield, at least for the time being. And it would not surprise me if Tevin Coleman ends up jumping over Devonta Freeman to be the official starter by the end of the year. Dez Bryant and the Cowboys not strong. Tyrod Taylor, thought that would be a favorable matchup, but how about that Baltimore defense? The best defensive performance, allowing the fewest yards in the NFL for over 5 years, and limiting a guy like Tyrod Taylor, a big sleeper who I thought has been underrated, to only 5 fantasy points. So those are our booms and our busts for week 1. If you had a bad week 1, don't fret too much. It's a long season ahead of you, and we have some ideas of what you could do to your team, but pretty much don't dismantle it right away. You need to play it out a little bit. We're going to look at some of the guys who you should absolutely go after on your waiver wire picks, but don't go and completely dismantle your team just because a guy had a bad week. Give it another week to rest and see what happens, and then after that, then maybe you make the big-time cuts. For example, the Coby Fleener. 1 more week, and if he does badly there, then we'll have to go 1 more and maybe get rid of him. But I'm holding on to people as longly as I can. In our next segment, we'll look at winning with the waiver wire when we come back here on NCTV 45.
Come to Big Paulie's Sports Bar in Newcastle.
The place is spacious with all the seating you'll need, with 2 bars and a huge menu that features wings, pizza, sandwiches, burgers, pasta, and fries.
Big Paulie's
Is just right to watch the game. You'll love the sports memorabilia throughout the bar. There's plenty of parking too.
Big Paulie's Sports Bar
In Newcastle at 207 East Long Avenue. Call 724-658-8800. That's 658-8800. Gentlemen, if you want to look your best with high-quality clothing, then I recommend Main Street Clothiers and Custom Tailors in downtown Newcastle. Mike Caggiano is the owner, and he and his staff have been in the business for decades, and they will always give you the right recommendations. They also carry Rondinelli tuxedos. That's Main Street Clothiers and Custom Tailors, 210 East Washington Street, downtown Newcastle. Call 724-652-3851.
Welcome back to the Cedars Sports Corner, 360 Sports Network Fantasy Toolkit here, giving you all of your fantasy information. In this segment, we're going to look at the waiver wire for Week 2 and some of the big names that you may want to look to pick up to help improve your team. And whether you won Week 1, whether you had the most points in the league or the least points in the league, you should always be looking to improve your team. Now, that doesn't mean, again, dropping everybody out there to go and pick up a potential no-name, but if there's anybody who is low on your radar, on your team, who was low, did not play last week, for example, or only got a couple yards, they need to go. You need to get some of these new guys in there. Go position by position real quick, just a couple of the big names. Quarterback, Alex Smith. We talked about trends in the first segment. How about this for a trend? He just set career highs in completions with 34, yards with 363. Does that mean Kansas City's going to pass it more? No. Not quite, because they were behind and Andy Reid's still going to run the ball. However, that is very good looking for Alex Smith fans in the future. I don't think you'll ever see him put up those numbers again, but he is, again, another quarterback who could end up being in our 4,000-yard category. That would be 17 now projected for the year. Jameis Winston out there in about 35% of leagues. I should mention Alex Smith available in 70% of leagues if you need him. He had 4 touchdowns last week. Here's my thing on Winston. He's got a couple really bad matchups coming up now, but you need to get him and stash him for the playoffs when he plays New Orleans twice in about a 4-week span right in playoff time. That's going to be your key to success. And Matt Ryan, available in over 50% of leagues. He had 300-plus yards, couple touchdowns. He goes to Oakland, who just got trashed through the air by New Orleans. So I'm really high on Matt Ryan this week. At running back, first off, Seattle has flip-flopped. Christine Michael is not the starter. Thomas Rawls is. Shouldn't surprise you. Rawls, even as the backup, had more time on the field than Christine Michael. Justin Forsett, he plays Cleveland this week. It might be worth picking him up. He's available in about 35% of leagues. He averages about 125 yards per game when he plays against Cleveland. How about Spencer Ware? He's still out there in about 20% of leagues. You got to pick him up if you can. We mentioned Tevin Coleman in the timeshare, 45% availability for Tevin Coleman. Theo Riddick is out there in about 30% of leagues. He had over 100 total yards and a pair of touchdowns. I don't think he'll quite produce that every week, but I think it's very possible he can be 70 to 80-yard guy with the number of touches that he gets from Stafford coming out of the backfield. At wide receiver, a couple of the big names first. Mohamed Sanu, we mentioned him with the injury. He was available in over 50% of leagues at the beginning of this week. Again, watch out for the injury. Will Fuller, he had 100 yards and a touchdown. He's out there in 30% of leagues. Victor Cruz, almost 3/4 of leagues out there. He had a touchdown. He's got a great matchup against New Orleans. He could be a plug-and-play in a flex position. Tajay Sharp, PPR especially. 7 catches, 76 yards for Tennessee. Oh, and he plays Detroit, which practically doesn't have a defense. How about Pittsburgh's Eli Rogers? I'm not as high on him this week, but I want to get him and stash him for the future. Cincinnati will be a bit tougher, but he did have 6 catches and a touchdown. So Eli Rogers looking really good. If you want San Diego's backup, it looks like it'll be Tyrell Williams taking the place of Keenan Allen. He only had 2 catches, but they did go for 71 yards, and now seems to be the guy who's going to get the main production increase. At tight end, I'm really intrigued by Clive Walford from Oakland. He's playing Atlanta, who gave up over 100 receptions to tight ends last year. So that's first things first. He only had 3 catches last week, but he was targeted on 21% of the times that he went out on passing routes. That means that Derek Carr is looking for him, and that's number one priority. You have to be looked for to even get any targets and therefore to get any completions. Dwayne Allen the exact same way, 21% of his routes he was targeted on. He had a touchdown last week, and again, Andrew Luck throwing the ball, he's thrown it. He had 3 of his touchdowns went to tight ends. Eric Ebron, also 5 catches, touchdown. He might be finally turning into the tight end that we expect him to be. On defense, two of the big ones in week one were Baltimore and Philadelphia. Guess what? They're both out there in about 70% of leagues. Baltimore especially I'm really big on in the future because they play at Cleveland, at Jacksonville their next 2 weeks. They host Oakland. I'm still not sure how big that offense is going to be, especially on the road against any sort of decent defense. New Orleans doesn't count. Then they have Washington in there, the Giants and the Jets before their bye week. You can be starting them in easily 4 or 5 games without too much question whatsoever. So now I want to introduce to you a game that we like to call Winning with the Wire. And the premise is this. If you score 90 points in a fantasy week in a standard league, you're going to win about 70% of the time. 90 points is about the average for a team to have from one week to the next. So what that means is in your starting lineup, to get 90 points, you need about 10 points per player if you're in a standard league, which would be quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wideouts, your flex, tight end, kicker, defense. So because of that, what we're going to say with this game is, winning with the wire, here's what you need to do. If a player is available in over 50% of leagues, he is available to you. You need to fill your team with all guys from the waiver wire, which means based on your NFL.com or ESPN.com or whatever Yahoo you choose to use, they need to be available in over 50% of leagues. So here's my team for this week coming up. At quarterback, I'm picking Matt Ryan going to Oakland. I think he's going to build off it and still playing a terrible defense this week. Wideout, I'm going to take Mohamed Sanu, if he's healthy, and Victor Cruz. Again, I think against a bad defense, I think he builds back into that Eli offense. If Sanu is out, I'm going to put my asterisk pick in right now of Eli Rogers from Pittsburgh, like we mentioned. Running back is tough this week because there aren't too many great running backs available on the wire. I'm going to go with James White, available in 60% of leagues. He had 6 touches, but he was on the field for about a third of snaps, and with 24 snaps and getting 6 touches, 8 targets, that means he's being looked at in 1/3 of the plays that he's on the field. So I think he can be able to get you maybe a garbage touchdown and plenty of yards. Shane Vereen, 70% of leagues, again, against a bad defense, New Orleans. I'll take him. He had 9 touches, over 50 yards last week. I'll take the possibility of him breaking one or just getting a plentiful number of catches. Tight end, I will go Dwayne Allen, available in 50% of leagues. He's playing a good defense this week in Denver, but I still think he'll put up solid enough numbers to get me my 7, 8, 9 point average that I would expect and want from a tight end position coming off the wire. Kicker, I'll take Matt Bryant. There's lots of options. He's out there in 80% of leagues. He had 10 fantasy points last week, and I expect lots of points out there to be scored in Oakland. And we mentioned Baltimore. They're my defense of choice, available in 70% of leagues. So Ryan at quarterback, White and Vereen at running back, Cruz and Mohamed Sanu. I didn't mention Tajay Sharp is my flex position going to Detroit. Dwayne Allen at tight end, Matt Bryant kicker, and Baltimore's defense. If you want to play Winning on the Wire, you can send us your team or your thoughts or comments at any time on Twitter by sending us a message at 3SN Fantasy or at 3S Network. When we come back, we're actually going to look at some of those messages you have sent us on Twitter, some of your start-sit questions, and even a trade question coming up, and then we'll look at position rankings and a little preview of Thursday Night Football, and that's when we return to the Fantasy Football Toolkit here on the Cedars Sports Corner.
If you want to score big, then get over to Shenango Auto Mall. George Fiacco, General Sales Manager, and his experienced staff will be glad to talk to you about all the amazing used car deals from their huge inventory. Lifetime powertrain warranties, extended warranties, and guaranteed credit approval. They have a body shop and full detail shop. It's not your normal used car lot. They also buy cars, trucks, and SUVs. Shenango Auto Mall is located at 2515 Elwood Road in Shenango Township. Call 724-698-7304.
The Branding Iron Bar and Grill, a great place to gather.
Some examples from the menu: 45-cent jumbo wings with 30 different kinds of sauce, meatball sub and fries, $5.50, hot cheese balls and burgers, and delicious large sandwiches. Stop in during happy hour, 4:30 to 7:30. You can dine in or take out. The Branding Iron Bar and Grill is located at 2221 Ben Franklin Highway, Edinburgh. Call 724-658-1210.
Back here on the Fantasy Football Toolkit Cedars Sports Corner, I'm James, the Value Man Dotson. I want to give a special thanks to everybody here at NCTV45 and NC Radio 450 for, again, allowing us to bring you this fantasy coverage. You can check us out, nctv45.com, at any time to view this episode and previous episodes. In this final segment here, we want to talk about a little bit of what's coming up this week in terms of position rankings, some of your start-sit questions, and even a trade question coming up, and then we'll look at this Thursday night football matchup. Let's start with some of your start-sit questions that you have sent us. Again, if you send us on Twitter or on Facebook, our Twitter handle at 3SN Fantasy or at 3S Network, you can send us any of your questions, and we like to answer them all. And I think we do a pretty darn good job at it between myself and everybody else here in the fantasy football community with 3SN. A round table of 5 or 6 guys all giving your input. We had an 83% success rate in giving the correct pick. And actually, the more common wrong pick was the fact that we said Keenan Allen in some instances, and he got hurt, and that's one that we really can't control very much of. So let's get right into it. First, at MUT Help asked for a combination question. He's asking to pick 2 between a running back 2 and a flex. He wants Spencer Ware, Matt Forte, Mike Wallace, and Steve Smith. So you need to pick a running back for sure, and then one more. I'm definitely picking both running backs in this case. I'm going to pick Matt Forte, and you want to start him at running back because he's playing the Thursday night game, and then put Spencer Ware in your flex. And the reason for that is if Spencer Ware ends up not starting, whether it's the fact that his little injury that we're not really concerned about, if he ends up going downgraded throughout the rest of the week, or if Jamal Charles steps back into the starting lineup, which I don't expect, but you have to prepare for, that way you can possibly switch him out for either Mike Wallace or Smith. And I'll probably give the edge to Mike Wallace, just thinking maybe a deep threat and maybe burning him deep. But definitely Forte at running back and Spencer Ware at the flex. Next question, at Daniel0085 asks for quarterback, Cam Newton or Drew Brees? Well, when you have, first of all, great job getting both of those quarterbacks in your league. I'm going to start Cam Newton. Even though San Francisco looked great last week, it was against L.A., I'm not buying it. I think that Newton, especially at home, a long week to prepare for everything, I think he goes off big time against a San Fran team that really is not anywhere as good as what they looked last week. And if you look at our position rankings more than anything, which we'll get to in a second, Newton number 1, I have Breeze at number 5 against New York, especially playing in the Meadowlands. I'm, again, a little shaky anytime Breeze goes on a natural surface rather than the fake turf. And the last one, we have a trade question in pretty early in the year. Little Louie asked if he wants to trade away Ezekiel Elliott to get T.Y. Hilton and Latavius Murray. Normally, I'm liking a 2-for-1 type scenario like this. I'm normally a fan of that. And I'm really not a fan of Ezekiel Elliott or any rookie running back. But I think I'm going to say to hold tight at this point. You need to definitely wait and see what Zeke is going to do. He's getting the bulk of the touches. You can't argue it just because of that right there. I like Hilton. I like Murray. But actually, Murray lost a few touches to a couple of his backups throughout the course of that game. And he's also very injury-prone as well. So stick tight with Ezekiel Elliott. Those are ones that we've already gotten in, and it's only Wednesday here. You can keep sending us more of yours, again, at 3SN Fantasy and 3S Network, and we answer them all, and hopefully we have a pretty darn good success rate. Real quick, some of your top picks in the top 10 for each position. Running down the top 10 at QBs, Cam Newton, Carson Palmer at number 2 playing Tampa Bay. Eli Manning against New Orleans actually jumps all the way to number 3 in our rankings. Rodgers and Breeze round out your top 5. Roethlisberger, Bortles, Stafford, Derek Carr, and Russell Wilson round out the top 10. Keep an eye on Russell Wilson. He is questionable. He's a little banged up, and actually watch that running game maybe to be a little more heavily favored because of the injury. At running back, David Johnson at number 1, C.J. Anderson at number 2, both playing at home. D'Angelo Williams at number 3. He could be higher, but playing Cincinnati, maybe a little bit unsure. Might be a bit more of a pass-heavy game, I'm feeling. Lamar Miller, again, a 100-yard game. He goes to Kansas City. That's the only reason he's down at number 4. AP, I think he gets a bounce-back game in the rivalry against Green Bay. Ezekiel Elliott, Spencer Ware, Matt Forte, Mark Ingram, and Todd Gurley round out the top 10. At wideout, Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, Julio Jones, A.J. Green, and DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, they're going to be your top 5 almost every single week throughout the year. Brandon Marshall, Thursday night game. He's at number 6. I think he bounces back from a bad week 1. Amari Cooper, Allen Robinson, Alshon Jeffrey, and watch Mike Evans. He's very consistent. That's the thing about him. He's not going to put the big numbers, but he's going to be consistent every week. Don't ever think twice about starting Mike Evans. At tight end, Gronk is number 1 if he plays. Obviously, he's always going to be. Olsen and Reed, 2 and 3. Kelsey and Delaney Walker playing Detroit, I think could be a real big daily fantasy play. I think he's going to be underpriced. I think he could be a huge pickup there. And I should mention at that point, you should also be checking out our Twitter pages throughout the rest of the week for a lot of daily fantasy info from the kid Kilpatrick. He'll be out there giving you all the info you could possibly want and then some. To round out the top 10, watch Antonio Gates, again, playing Jacksonville. Not a great defense, and with Keenan Allen now gone, Gates probably factors back in a little bit more. He could be a good daily play. Dwayne Allen, Jason Witten, Walford, and Fleener to round out your top 10. Real quick, in our last couple of minutes here, let's look at this Thursday night matchup. It is Buffalo hosting the New York Football Jets. And as you just heard, our top 10, there are no Buffalo Bills in the top 10 this week in rankings. And after their performance last week, again, the fewest offensive yards in the NFL in over 5 seasons, yeah, they don't deserve to have anybody up there in that top 10. LaShawn McCoy, probably the best bet. Maybe Tyrod Taylor. Not too thrilled with how he played in week 1. I'm going to take a week and wait it out, especially when there are so many great quarterbacks who are available on free agency that should be safer picks for the week. For the Jets, Matt Forte is the number 8 rated running back. I'm really fond of Forte this week. I think he can pull off a solid game. Nothing spectacular, but he'll get you double-digit points, I think. And Brandon Marshall, he bounces back without a doubt in my mind. He wants to have the most catches in the NFL. He needs to try to catch up to Antonio Brown pretty quickly. He's number 6 on my list this week. I think he has maybe a double-digit catch game, and I'll bet he has a touchdown for sure. I think Brandon Marshall could be a big-time fantasy play, especially daily leagues where I bet you he will be a little bit underpriced because of his bad play last week. Tight end position, nothing. Defense, I don't trust either defense enough at all to be playing any of them. So mainly it's Forte, Marshall, and maybe LaShawn McCoy. And unless you're playing a 2-quarterback system, you want both Fitzpatrick and Tyrod Taylor on your bench this week. Well, that's going to wrap it up here for the Cedars Sports Corner, your fantasy football updates for the week. Again, tune in at NCTV45, on Twitter at NCTV45, and for our personal page, at 3SN Fantasy and at 3S Network. Send us all your questions and get constant updates throughout the week leading up to game time. We answer all your start-sit questions to make your team as good as possible. Good luck in week 2, ladies and gentlemen, and have a good night.
This program furnished by Sporting Goods, 23 East Washington Street, Newcastle. Call 724-658-2535. Funding for this program provided by Washington Center Physical Therapy, Norm A. Gabriel, MSPT, ATC owner.